I'm going to regret this.
Welcome to the Nerd Party.
Hi, this is Nick Anastasiou, story editor on Star Wars The Clone Wars and Star Wars Bad Batch. And you are listening to Aggressive Negotiations.
Well, hello and welcome to Aggressive Negotiations, a Star Wars podcast. And I am just one of your hosts here, Matthew Rushing. And of course, you can tell my voice is much more Darth Vader-ish and teenage boyish all at the same time. And with me, as he is always, the one and only beautifully built Jedi Master, John Mills. John, it's a new year. And how are you celebrating?
Well, I don't know how we got to a new year. I think it has something to do with how we hit hyperspace last time. I think we dragged along a few Purgle. And obviously, the Techno-Union suit that you're wearing is not vocoding your throat quite right. So we're going to have to twist a couple of those knobs and get you there. Yes, the Techno-Union Army.
Is at your disposal, Count.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because we are going to be in the prequel era as we finally wrap up the Jedi Apprentice series with the final book in the series. There are two specials that we may touch on later on, but we're wrapping up the main series and we're excited to do that. Before we do and dive into our review of The Threat Within, you can find us everywhere you get your podcasts. We would appreciate it, of course, if you're listening to this. If you would subscribe and please share us on social media to your friends. You can follow us at the Jedi Masters, and our entire network is at Join Nerd Party. We're on Facebook at facebook.com/The Nerd Party. We're on Instagram at The Nerd Party, and we're at thenerdparty.com where you can see all of the different shows that we do. And there's a lot of different stuff coming out of the Nerd Party, so we hope that you will check all that out. John, I think one of the things that I noticed about this book was the intention that Watson really has in trying to tie this series all together and really, I think, build on the fact that she has been playing with 4 years of Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon's life, and this is the end of that 4 years. And that's one of the things I thought was really great about this book was the nice callbacks to the previous books that really accentuate the growth for these characters. And really, I mean, Watson put these characters through the ringer.
What's tough with this is, you know how hardcore I am about the idea that I should be able to jump into a sequel, whether it's book or movie, and just plug in and go. And I think that this book is struggling a little bit with that. But at the same time, I think that Watson does a good job, like you're saying, of tying everything back so that you get the sense of history, even if you haven't read it. But at the same time, where I think a little bit of the connection struggles is that Watson makes reference to past stuff, but focuses a little too much on stuff that's more recent past. It doesn't have the feeling of complete callback the way that you might expect from somebody who's coming into a series and saying, okay, this is the end of the journey sort of thing. But I don't want that criticism to be too pointed because that's exactly where Rise of Skywalker goes off the rails, is it's entirely too focused on trying to cram everything into one giant callback soup. Whereas if you go to Revenge of the Sith or Return of the Jedi, there's a sense of history, but they don't obsess over it. Luke doesn't really talk about being a moisture farmer in Return of the Jedi, and they refer to the fact that Vader and Luke have fought before, but they don't say, remember, like when you got your hand cut off at Bespin? Like, so it's not entirely obvious. And Watson, I think, does also a very good job of making sure that those callback moments are internal monologue as opposed to clumsy exposition between the characters.
So if I read you correctly, what you're saying is that the sequel trilogy feels like an episode of Family Guy where the dad's like, remember that time? And this book feels a little bit more organic in the sense that the callbacks that we're getting, Watson is using the storyline here to connect with a storyline that was very important and poignant for both Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon, and had a huge impact on Obi-Wan's growth.
Yeah, that's true.
And so to do that, this really is, again, she's crafting this story on purpose to show us the way in which Obi-Wan handles this story is very different than the way he did in that, first story, which, she's calling back to the Melody Dawn series of stories where, Obi-Wan gets kind of wrapped up in what's happening on those planets. He actually leaves the Jedi Order, and then in leaving the Jedi Order, kind of quickly realizes the utter mistake that he's made, and that he's made the wrong choice, and that what he thought was happening is not the right thing. And so it's so interesting because, of course, that's playing into, and I have no idea how you really say these aliens' names, the Voriadax, I'm guessing, and their whole planet is kind of going through that same situation, right? You have one group who they want change, they think they know how to make it, and they're doing these things to get the change, but even inside their group, they're disconnected from one another as to exactly how to make that come about. And that was, again, I think Watson really shows, and this is a short book, right? But in the amount of time, just a real deft hand at connecting with the previous story, but I think also making a compelling new story that felt somewhat relevant to the world we live in too.
Agreed. I think that and I was saying Vorzidiak, but I have no idea how to pronounce it either.
Yeah, I'm just guessing, man.
There's a character named Narnia in it, and every time I saw it, I kept thinking Narnia. And then there's a character named Grath, and I kept saying Garth in my head and thinking of Wayne's World. So for those younger members of the audience, you might not remember Wayne's World, but other members of the audience do remember Wayne's World. So work with us here.
Excellent.
Yeah. But it is a good type of story with what's going on. I was going to say V because that's the first letter in the alien planet name. So V4 and V5 are tense with each other, and the tension is being exacerbated by what are considered terrorist disruptions to worker productivity, which is at the corner of V4's whole culture. And loss of productivity is psychologically and economically devastating to them. So that's interesting. That's a complicated sort of concept to come at. And you find out it's because this counterculture movement that's going on V4, which is then in itself splintering, right? As you're talking about here. And that, I think, is one of the things where this story maybe should have been 2 books instead of 1. This feels like that specific aspect of the story gets a little bit of short shrift and could have been plotted out a little more. It could have been fleshed out more, basically. Because where you're looking at the social commentary aspect of it, maybe is reaching to the sort of the Gen Xers of the time, struggling to find, or even millennials struggling to find identity with their parents, but also a callback to the 60s where work is, people start reassessing whether work is really the most important thing or whether we need to be enjoying life, that sort of stuff. It feels like that could have been fleshed out more, a little more intrigue, and maybe a little bit more of a red herring, because I think V5 gets short shrift as the perceived villain, specifically because with how short the book is, Watson never really gets a chance to play with the tension or build it sufficiently, I would say. It's there and then it goes away. It's just resolved a little too cleanly, and it's even resolved in a sense off screen, for lack of a better term, because Qui-Gon says, I'll have to get them to be peaceful with their resolution. And then like a page later, it's like, well, it's a good thing those talks went well. It's like, oh, well, that would have been nice to witness, I guess.
No, I do agree with you on that. I think that part, it did feel like the book, if it had been, even 10 pages longer, I feel like you could have really gotten at a lot of the things that you're getting at, 100%. I think the thing is you're talking through, the different issues, and I love the way you kind of pulled in all the historical references, because I 100% think that all of that's in there. The thing that really, I think it kind of shows that when you create a story and you use kind of timeless themes, the way that you can apply it to so many different time periods. And I was thinking specifically, with this group of kids on V5 who are V4, and they are trying to disrupt the productivity of this planet, who's completely driven by work and work alone, to create free time, to create more than just one type of life, which is work. And they're willing to go to more and more extreme measures as they go along to do so, and to get their point across, because they feel morally vindicated in their position. And every big movement in history, whether it's been good or bad, has felt themselves to be morally vindicated. And the how far they're willing to go sometimes becomes a byproduct of that blindness that can create. And I really appreciated that, Watson gives a picture of that here in the book, because again, it's as poignant as ever, to see that, what really needs to happen is, and I think the beauty of this, I was thinking specifically of the civil rights movement, in the way in which there are two different sides. There's the violent side and the non-violent side. Basically having Obi-Wan kind of stand up and give the type of speech, and then be backed up by Qui-Gon, that you would kind of hear from, MLK Jr., which is an interesting thing to say, but like to say, hey, this isn't getting us anywhere. This violence is separating us. You're making the message harder to hear. And what we really need is to sit down and to hear one another, to listen to one another, and find a way to come to a solution that benefits as many people as possible. Qui-Gon even talks about too. It's like, that also means that you might not always completely agree. And that also needs to be okay. So just the sheer gamut of things that Watson is kind of touching on in this book, I think is pretty astounding. And I'm with you in the sense that the only downside really to the book, I think, is just that I just wanted there to be more of it, because I think the storyline and what she's created really kind of warrant, being able to dive in a little bit deeper. And that's one of those things where it's like, you read these books and it's almost like when you'd watch maybe a Clone Wars episode and you're just wishing it was a two-parter, that's really how I felt. I'm right there with you. I kind of felt that way in this book. Make it a little bit longer book since it's the end, or, just give us a two-parter.
I think two-parter is the only way to really treat it, and to give it all of the space that it needs to breathe, especially with trying to wrap up Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan and get them to a certain point that's going to serve this story, but also set the stage for the series to end and have somebody say, okay, I can see this as the two characters that walk on screen at the beginning of The Phantom Menace. And here's where I'll do sort of like the compliment sandwich thing, because in that sense, I see her taking Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan. I see them as those characters pretty much here, while at the same time leaving the room for there to be further adventures that I don't see, just like a good Clone Wars arc. If you left it there, I'm fine. But if you suddenly came out with an episode that bridged between this and the other one, I'm also fine. Because you've taken them far enough without taking them right up to the moment of walking on screen in The Phantom Menace. That's awesome.
Yeah,
But,
I mean, you know.
Yeah, no, go ahead. Go ahead, please.
So I was just going to say, because I think the beauty of, you know, I talked a little bit about Obi-Wan, but I think the beauty of this story is really what it does for Qui-Gon. And, you know, putting him through the story that he's been with Tall, losing her. And I just really loved the way in which he's struggling with this idea of Obi-Wan growing up and knowing that sooner rather than later at this point, he's going to take the trials and they're not going to be together as a team. And him struggling a little bit with this idea of attachment that, you know, and I think that there's something incredibly beautiful about that. And to kind of push that forward, the thing that it made me think was, you know, Dave Filoni has talked about the beauty of the Duel of Fates fight and how it's really a fight for the soul of Anakin. Because, you know, if Qui-Gon survives, things are very different. And I think this book gives us the picture of why. Because Qui-Gon has that ability, I think, to struggle a little bit more with attachment than Obi-Wan does, who I think by the time we see him really, you know, especially in episode 2, he's had his opportunities, right? But he's really fomented into a man who is the quintessential of what the Jedi were called to be in that time period, you know, and not have as much of a struggle, and so that's where I was really appreciative of the work that Watson had done here, and I'm sure in some ways almost unintentionally, because, you know, I don't think anybody at this time period really understood the complexity and the depth of Qui-Gon and his journey yet. But to me, it really, you know, reading it now, it felt really good to read.
I definitely think that Watson has an understanding of Qui-Gon, and we've referenced this in previous books that we've discussed in the series, where Watson has, I would love to sit down with her and discuss and find out, did she have some sort of character Bible that was handed to her? Because this is the Qui-Gon I saw on screen. This is the Qui-Gon that I defended. This is the Qui-Gon that I fell in love with back in 1999. Throughout this whole series, I see him get there, and I see the aspects of him, and even the way that he speaks, I can hear Liam Neeson saying his lines. And to get back to sort of the meat of my compliment sandwich is that where this also could have benefited from a longer treatment, whether it's 2 books or 10 more pages or what have you, is while the callbacks are all internal monologue, and I applaud that, I would have liked more expository moments near the end of this arc with Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan stating things a little more plainly, because this is one of those things where it also could/should have set up a little more that not only are they at the point where Qui-Gon's more mature and ready to let Obi-Wan go, but there's still a little bit of friction in between them when they find Anakin, because Obi-Wan's caught a little off guard about taking the trials. Qui-Gon is like, you know, I take Anakin Skywalker as my Padawan. Well, you can't. You already have one. Yeah, Obi-Wan can take the trials. And there's this split second where Obi-Wan's like, oh, yeah, I can. Right. Yes, I'm ready for it. So do you see what I'm getting at? Where it's like it's a little too friendly the way that they've wrapped it up. There should be a little bit more space for friction at the end of this arc.
I think I completely get what you're saying, but I almost feel as though what it needed is to feel a little bit more like Obi-Wan specifically as a character is more attached to Qui-Gon in this moment, because I think that's the almost the feeling you get in that scene, and at least that's how I always read it in The Phantom Menace. He's like taken aback that he would just be kind of brushed aside, and it hurts his feelings because
absolutely,
they're a team, and so I think it's that. And I don't know exactly how you do it, but you just need to convey somehow in the dialogue this idea of Obi-Wan not quite being like, Qui-Gon's been realizing that Obi-Wan is going to be at that point, but that's not where Obi-Wan is. And even almost in The Phantom Menace, that's not quite where he is, where, he says he's ready to take the trials. But in some ways, I think there's kind of such a love and respect he has for his master that, does that make any sense what I'm trying to get at?
It does. I think at this point we're sort of like splitting hairs, because that I don't disagree with what you're saying there, but I think that Obi-Wan is caught off guard, and it would have been in The Phantom Menace. Like, it's not just their emotional relationship, but it feels like there's supposed to be a little bit more formality to somebody presenting somebody as ready to face the trials.
Sure. Yeah.
And Qui-Gon is perfunctorily just like, he can face the trials. It's totally cool. And that is one of the things that catches Obi-Wan off guard, is like, oh, wait, yeah, right, yeah, sure, yes, I am.
Well, and Obi-Wan being kind of a stickler for the rules anyway.
Sure.
Right? Like, he's a slightly more rule-based character, and so for him to not have the formality like you're saying, I think absolutely I get it.
Yeah, it would be sort of like presenting somebody for some sort of degree, right? And your teacher shows, you show up with your teacher and you're like, I got to feel ready to graduate and everything like that. And the teacher's like, give him the final exam. What? Sure. Yeah. Okay, great. As opposed to like, hey, I'm going to present you to the board to give your master's thesis right now. I think you're ready to do it, sort of thing. Anyway, that's all higher education stuff, and I'm a very simple man. So I don't even know how that works. But I think that what's fascinating about it, and this has happened to us repeatedly throughout this series, is the fact that Watson, with these short little young adult books, gives enough for, two grown adults to sit there and go back and forth about this. And I think that what I really walk away with, knowing that this is the last official book in the series, outside those two special ones you referenced, is the fact that I really want Watson to come back and get another turn with Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan, for Pete's sake. Please. Like, I don't understand why you wouldn't. I'm sure there are a number of reasons, practically speaking, and everything like that. But I read this book, and the shortcomings, it feels like a more of a pitch for a larger story. And it's restricted by the format and the rules of the format that Watson has to play by for, contractual reasons or what have you. I would love for this specific story, just like so many others in the series, to give Watson the chance to come back, update it, align it with, quote unquote canon a little more now that Clone Wars series has happened and everything, and get like a full book out of this.
I think the thing that I think about this is that, there's reference stories in the Clone Wars that I think should be told in this type of series. And specifically, I think of the story of Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan on Mandalore. Mm-hmm. And, Obi-Wan's running and love interest Satine. And, I think it's disappointing to me that nobody has ever picked up that storyline and created maybe a trilogy of stories. because it's set in this time period. And I think that this time period is rife for storytelling. And obviously we're going to be getting John Jackson Miller's The Living Force, which takes place in the prequel era with the Jedi Order at that time period before the Phantom Menace. But to me, forget, the High Republic kind of stuff. Give me those Jedi,
oh my
in
gosh.
this time period. And again, like this series shows, there's so much storytelling to tell about these characters, especially like an Obi-Wan and a Qui-Gon, that I think could only benefit fans. I think it would sell like gangbusters because fans love that kind of stuff. And it's a time period which, is Disney really ever going to touch that time period like that again, ever? Probably not, unless you did some sort of animated series, but I don't think that's going to happen. And so, just create, this is the milieu that you play in, with the books for the next few years.
It's funny because when you said, you heard my reaction when you mentioned the High Republic, I can legitimately say that I had forgotten that the High Republic was going on. I know Acolyte is a series that's coming together that's going to tie into that time period, but it's legitimately something where it's legitimately something where I think it underscores how much I agree with you that this still resonates coming back to it. How long has it been since these books have been written, right? It's been quite a while. And the fact that they still land, I think, speaks very much to the fact that this time period in the saga is still very rich and offers tremendous opportunity to the right author that wants to or can, run with it, as it were. And again, I'll continue my small little vocal campaign here in our little corner of the galaxy to say that I think Watson deserves that shot. Let her come back and say, look through the whole series. Can you turn this into a trilogy? Can you take the best of everything, put it in a blender? This is yours. This is your baby. Come in, have at it. Yeah. I'd love to see it.
And do it as adult novels, right? Where, you've got 300 pages or more a novel to be able to really dig in. So, no, I couldn't agree with you more. And I think, that really does lead me to, as we wrap up this last book in the series, the official book in the series, where do you end up with the ratings for The Threat Within?
Well, as much as I enjoyed it, because of those shortcomings that we talked about, since we're working on a 5-point scale, because there will never be another scale, we thought 4 stars was it. It's 5 stars. Nobody will ever be crazy enough to go for 6. On a 5-star scale, this is a solid 3. Very enjoyable. Glad I read it. Obviously gave us something to talk about, but a little bit of frustration because there were just elements that could have been fleshed out better. What about you?
Yeah, on Goodreads, I gave this a 4, but it's really, I think, a 3.5. And I think for very similar reasons that you gave, I really did enjoy the book, and I thought it was a good kind of wrap up. But in some ways, because it was the end, I was wanting, I guess, more. And I think that's a testament, honestly, to Watson and the fact that this whole time, really, I feel like almost every book, our one refrain has really just been, oh man, I just could have more of this. And, that's the thing where any good author and any good storytelling kind of leaves you with that, right? You're like, you can see yourself wanting more in it. And so, walking through the series has been a joy for me. And I know, and for you too, the fact that, to be in this time period with, for us, for me, Obi-Wan, my favorite character, for you, Qui-Gon, your favorite character, and to be able to spend this amount of time with him has been a real joy. So hopefully we'll get that opportunity there in the future. But, John, if people did want to catch up with you, and see the things that you're working on here in the year 2024 and beyond, where would they find you?
Well, here in the galactic year of 2024, big things are going to happen, just probably not to me, but you can reach out to me online as Kessel Junkie, KESSELJUNKIE. You can find me right here on the network, co-hosting a show called House Lights with Tristan Riddell and Darren Moser, where we look at the works of directors and segments of their careers and different topic areas and stuff like that. We have a time. And I love to reference the appearances that I've made over on the 602 Club over on TFM, which is hosted by you, Mr. Matthew Rushing. So where can people find you out there?
Well, when I don't sound like Darth Vader / a frog, you can find me all over social media under the name Matt Rushing02. Of course, here on the network, I also have Owl Posts with Trey Kaufman talking about every single chapter of the Harry Potter series, one chapter at a time. Got the 602 Club there on the TFM network and some great stuff coming up for you this year. Slowing down a little bit for me, getting into a new job, but I'm excited to say that the first episode of the year is going to feature none other than John Mills. So people are going to want to check that out. You can also find me doing The Orb, Warp 5, Artificial Tango, Saddle Up, and Literary Treks. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So, John, wow, Jedi Apprentice is over. I hear the bells of the Jedi Temple ringing. I think it's time to go to the Room of 1,000 Fountains and hit a little meditation.
Master Rushing, let's go meditate, and hopefully that water doesn't make other things want to happen. Negotiations are closed.
Join the revolution. Join the Nerd Party.